Schools must be held accountable for the results that they produce. Now, without any loss of generality, we can substitute teachers in place of schools. So, teachers must be held accountable for the results that they produce. My name is Kendall Wright, and I'm currently a student studying to become a math teacher at Mississippi State, and I'm currently in Dr. Kay Bricata's Planning for the Diverse Learner class. And in this class, we're all considered teachers. So, when Nell Noddings opened her book, The Challenge to Care in Schools, with this seemingly simple statement, I couldn't help but insert my own name. My mind then began to roam to exactly what kind of results I was going to be held responsible for. Test scores, GPA, creating responsible, active citizens, college acceptance rates? What? Well, Nell Noddings answers this question and then spends the rest of her book supporting her ideas. And her answer is very simple. We are to be held responsible for everything. Well, needless to say, I was a little overwhelmed at this point. I mean, I'm a math major who knows very little about history and science and English. So at this point, I actually quit reading the book to learn a little bit more about Nell Noddings herself to see if I agreed with her enough to continue reading the book. Well, I soon discovered that she actually did know what she was talking about. She bases all of her ideas off of her own experiences as a student and then as an elementary and high school math teacher before going to get her PhD in educational psychology. And then she stayed at the collegiate level, as well as raising her own very diverse family of 10. I thought this was so neat because, one, I'm becoming a math teacher, so all of the math examples she made in her book I was really able to connect with. And secondly, because I'm actually the oldest of 10 kids. So when she encourages her readers at the very beginning of her book to pretend to be the parent of a very large, heterogeneous family, it wasn't that hard for me. I was able to think about how, despite our family has the same two parents, each of my brothers and sisters and I are so different. We have different likes, dislikes, strengths and weaknesses. And so if we are that different and we have the same two biological parents, imagine how different it's going to be teaching a class full of students with different parents. Well, it was through all of these experiences that Nell Noddings learned exactly how important it was as a teacher to instill everything in a student. Now, when I say everything, Noddings is very careful to note that we need specialists in each content area. She just encourages us as teachers to teach our students more than just academics. We must teach them how to care. Now, before we go any further, I want to first explain what caring is. A caring relation is, at its very most basic form, a connection or an encounter between two human beings, a carer and a cared for. In order for it to be properly called caring, both parties have to contribute. Simply, the carer must show that they care, and the cared for must recognize and accept that. A failure on the part of either one of these blocks the whole completion. There can still be a relationship, but it just won't be a caring one. Noddings then goes on to state the heart of her whole philosophy, and it's simple. We must care for each of our students, and it doesn't stop there. We must instill in them a care for themselves, for other people, for other things, such as plants, animals, the environment, and objects, and ideas. At first, I was just a little bit skeptical of this, but then I began to see all the good that could come. For instance, when we truly care for our students individually and not just as a generic whole, we will begin to learn what our students are really like. We will work to find ways to bring students' interest into our class rather than strictly following the Common Core standards and those alone. For instance, finding math problems that actually relate to my students' lives and problems that interest them will make math so much more meaningful and give them a real reason to want to learn math. Students will also become more motivated and more well-behaved. In a study recently published by Pearson, only 40% of students feel like their teachers actually care. That statistic is so low. I know we can all think back to school and remember when we were students and you had those teachers that you knew cared about you, those teachers that you knew did not care for students at all, and then those teachers that just fell in the middle. You didn't really know how they felt about you. Well, I can relate. When I was in 9th grade, my grandfather, who had been sick for a very long time, was having to be taken off of life support. And unfortunately, it was during the school year, and I was in English class when it was going to happen. And I did not know what was going on that day. The only thing I could focus on was the fact that my grandfather was not going to be with me the next day. And until I heard a knock on the door, and it was my Spanish teacher who fell in that category of I didn't know where she stood about caring for me. She pulled me out of class and brought me to her room where she gave me a box of tissues and a huge bag of Rolos and just let me cry on her shoulder and eat chocolate and tell her fun stories about my grandfather. And it meant so much to me. I don't think she'll ever know how much that meant to me. It was that day that I learned that she really did care for me, and it made such a difference. I immediately became more motivated in her class and more well behaved, and I wanted to show her how much I appreciated what she had done for me. And also, I learned how to care too. Her showing me that, it made an influence, which leads into my last point. When you care, students will begin to care too. I know this sounds really cheesy, but the kids we're going to be teaching, they're going to be the next generation. There may be a future president in your class, or an engineer, or a clerk, or a teacher, or even just a parent. Caring themes are not always taught and reinforced in the home anymore. And according to Brompenwerner's ecological model, we as teachers are the next in line when it comes to influencing a student's life. While Nell Noddings encourages whole schools to change and basically teach academics only half the day and caring themes the other half, I realize that this is very unrealistic. Not many schools are willing or even able to focus on academics for only 3 to 4 hours a day. I want to take a much more realistic approach in my classroom. For example, first of all, math is all about modeling. So I want to model what caring looks like to my students. We can't merely give students a definition of what caring is and have them read a book on it and expect everything to click. If you'll think back to how you learned what love was, what courage was back when you were younger, it was because someone modeled that behavior to you. I want to model that aspect to my students so they can see what it looks like, especially if they're not getting that at home. Secondly, I want to promote dialogue about caring. So many teachers are so hesitant to talk about anything outside of their content area. They have this mindset that you can only teach what's on the Common Core state standards or on the Mississippi framework, and that's it. Caring, it has some gray areas, and most people don't want the problems and the discussions that'll come along with it. And so while it will be really hard, I really want to be there to talk about my students about caring. When we care, we often learn more about it by talking with others, by learning whether what we're doing is working or not. And I want to be there for my students. Thirdly, I want to give students an opportunity to practice. We make students practice math problems and free throws and vocabulary words, and so it only makes sense that we should give students a chance to practice and then reflect on caring. In a math classroom, this simply could just mean giving students problems that involve ethics and then promoting discussion about it afterwards. For instance, when learning about exponential decay and exponential growth, have problems that involve the decay of the rainforest or extinct animals or the ozone layer or growth of finances of the world. There's so many problems that can be explored that involve things besides just themselves. Having students practice things like this will give them a chance to practice what it means to really care. And finally, I want to confirm my students when they do something great. Math is a subject that I feel is taught best when there's a big learning experience. In my math class, I want students to be able to work together in cooperative learning and in group activities. And this gives students a chance to interact with each other and learn how to care for each other. There's going to be times where students do things that are great, and students may mess up when they're interacting with their fellow peers. Making sure I confirm my students and encourage them when I see them do something great is a key part of caring and showing students that I care for them and also that they should continue caring for each other. I want to conclude by actually reading the same statement that Nell Noddings concludes her book, The Challenge to Care in Schools in. It's very simple. She simply says, we have to stop asking, how can we get kids to learn math? How can we make all our kids ready for college? How can we keep kids in school even though they hate it? And how can we prepare teachers for the real world of teaching? Instead, we have to change that world. We have to ask, how can my subject serve the needs of each of these students? How can I teach so as to capitalize on their intelligence and affiliations? How can I complete the caring connection with as many as possible? How can I help them to care for themselves, other humans, animals, the natural environment, the human-made environment, and the wonderful world of ideas? As we ask these questions, we may find an authentic way to prepare teachers. Earlier in this book, I quoted John Dewey as saying, "What the wisest and best parent wants for his own child, that must the community want for all its children. Any other idea for schools is narrow and unlovely, and acted upon, it destroys our democracy." He was right. But now, we must not think narrowly about what we might want for this particular child of our own, and then extrapolate that to all children. Rather, we must start with a vision of ourselves as the wise parents of a large heterogeneous family and ask, what do I want for all of them, for each of them? Then, and only then, can we commit ourselves to enacting this vision for all of our children. Thank you.